Go ahead and get started. Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm pleased to call to order the October 12th, 2023 meeting of the Planning Commission for the City of Grosse Pointe Park. I'm especially pleased because the Assistant City Manager gave me my gavel back this time. I didn't have it at the last meeting, so thank you, Warren. And if you would assist me with the roll call. Yes. Commissioner Taylor.
Present.
Commissioner Saros.
Present.
Commissioner Stechke.
Present.
Commissioner McCaffrey.
Present.
Commissioner Hodges.
Present.
Chairman Coco. I'm here as well. We need Commissioner Evans is not able to be here tonight. We need a motion to excuse him. If anybody would be willing to make that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Commissioner Evans is excused. Item 3 of our agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from the last meeting. I trust that all the commissioners had a chance to review those minutes in the packet that we were provided from the Assistant City Manager. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of our prior meeting from September 13th?
Motion to, second.
Mayor Hodges will get the first one and Commissioner Saros will get the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. And we are cruising right along, everyone, to item number 4, which is public comment on our agenda items tonight. And the way the agenda is worded, everybody, we have 2 public comment sessions, but in talking with Warren, we've kind of decided to just roll that all into one, because our one agenda item tonight is is a discussion involving short-term rentals. And I have a suspicion that probably the majority of you here are here to talk about other things, and I'm glad to see you all here. And I did want to mention before we open it up to public comment, I'm on Facebook, and I have seen a lot of the discussion on the Grosse Pointe Park community Facebook pages regarding the zoning proposals. And there are a couple of things that I just want to address about that, and I want to hear, and we all want to hear from what everybody has to say. But a couple of things I wanted to say is this. Number one, it's really important, everybody, to remember that what was posted and what was presented at the last Planning Commission meeting was a proposal. It was the first time the commission as a body had seen any of that. And I hope some of you were watching on Facebook at the last meeting, but I think in particular, Commissioner Stechke and Commissioner Saros raised a lot of the same concerns that the rest of the community has, and they're valid concerns, and they're concerns that we're addressing, all right? And one of the big issues was with the transitional district in the zoning proposal. And I think rightfully, a lot of people they have a lot of comments and a lot of feelings about what was proposed. But it's important to remember that's just a proposal. And Commissioner Stechke said it really well, and I agree with him, and I think the rest of us do too. It should not be easier to tear down a house and build a parking lot than it is to change the outward appearance of a home or to add another unit to a multi-unit dwelling or anything like that. And hopefully you all saw that as a commission, we were concerned about the same things that the rest of the public is, because we're not some cabal sitting here trying to dictate what happens to only your lives. We're your neighbors and we're all a community. Okay, so please remember that. This is just a proposal. Nothing has been finalized. And we've already discussed things with McKenna about how we can potentially redraft that and require additional special land use variances and things like that if there's ever a request to make a parking lot. And as chair, I'm sitting here and I have no knowledge that anybody is trying to turn any other homes into parking lots anywhere. We don't have any applications before us as far as I know. Warren, I'm sure you'll correct me, but I just wanted to say that because there's a lot of frustration that I noticed online, and I think a lot of it is justified, but we hear the same things that you do, and we want to address the same concerns that you all have. That's why this is a collaborative process. That's why it takes multiple meetings to make any of this final. Okay, so with that in mind, we'd love to open this up now to public comment, just in general. If anybody has anything to say, please raise your hands. And what we'll do, I I see a couple of hands and I see one in the back row. I see no one in the front row. So we're going to start in the back row and move our way up. And there was a ma'am over there in the corner. Why don't you come up? You can go first, please.
And just to be clear, we will have 2 periods of public comments today, both now and later. And any topic is, fair game for both of the public comment.
Thanks, Warren. Hi, please introduce yourself and what do you have to say?
My name is Heather Loku and I live at 782 Lake Point, and I'm coming to discuss the short-term rentals, commonly known as Airbnb. We have short-term rentals, they've been here, they're happening in the city, and I would like to see the council start to regulate those short-term rentals would be ideal. And ideally, I'd like to see us issue a limited number of licenses and maybe certainly break it up, whether it be by neighborhoods or by precincts, because we do have Airbnbs. And so if we're able to issue licenses and a limited number of licenses per neighborhood, then no one neighborhood's going to bear the burden of the entire Airbnb market. So that would be ideal, in my opinion. I'd also like to see preference given for local owners for those licenses. And if you're not a local owner, at the very least, you have to have a local contact. The average age of our home are well over 70 years. Things happen, you have to be able to get a hold of somebody in case of that emergency. I think that with proper codes and enforcement, you can't have 10 people renting out a 2-bedroom home. This can be a successful thing for the community, and we can balance the right of property owners with the quiet enjoyment of their neighbors. So I support the short-term rentals because property owners do have rights, but we also balancing between quiet enjoyment of their neighbors. Nobody wants to be living next to a hotel. We can limit that, particularly by licensing and limiting the number of licenses per neighbor would be ideal. Obviously, there's a lot of other things like codes and enforcement and notices and so many complaints, but initially they're here. We're not a spring break destination. People are coming to visit family. They're coming for sicknesses. They're coming for celebrations. This done right can be a win-win for both the property owners and the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Ma'am in the second or third row from the back, come on up, please.
So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you letting people get here. Mine are mostly about the transition zones. So with no notice via Facebook or email listserv, the draft was put into the public domain about a month ago for the first time. No proactive community engagement again. And really, the statute of limitations for doing better on communications and engagement has expired. As the city's own language says, Grosse Pointe Park has adopted a master plan and sub-area plan intended to guide growth in a logical and orderly fashion, which serves as the basis of the zoning ordinance. And yet, provisions inserted into this draft, most notably transition stuff, is not found in the master plan. And I am very confused by city social media posts this past week that were an obvious response to public outcry. On October 3rd, the city posted and said, under the draft, parking lots would be permitted in transition districts. That's not accurate. The draft would allow them by right. That post was shared a few days later by the mayor with some commentary that included the following, and I'm quoting here. The commission has been deliberate about thoroughly reviewing the draft, one chapter at a time during a series of workshops. So I searched your portal, the Planning Commission, no public notice, no information about the series of workshops. Who attended them, when, and were they subject to the Open Meetings Act? This city owes the public a full annotated timeline of how this document labeled Draft 3 was crafted. 2 other issues. First, Section 7 of the Commission's bylaws refers to conflicts of interest. The public has the right to know which commissioners own property or have other financial interests in the area under consideration in the zoning rewrite, and those who should recuse themselves. Finally, this is an excellent time, and Mr. Chairman, it's not too late, for the creation of a citizen committee that your bylaws provide for. And they say, quote, the purpose of the citizen committee is to have more citizen and municipal government involvement, to be able to use individuals who are knowledgeable or expert in the particular issue before the Planning Commission, and to better represent various interest groups in the city. Now, in her post, the mayor referred to the Cabbage Patch as our Cabbage Patch. Really, to my knowledge, not one of these commissioners is a resident, though at least one and perhaps others have business interests here. We live in ground zero for these critical zoning proposals. Where is our representation? 2 other things, Mr. Chairman. One, I looked at the minutes for tonight's meeting, and you said from the dais that a couple of the commissioners had some questions. I didn't see those reflected in the minutes. You should fix your minutes, because people shouldn't have to go back and look at the whole meeting to get that information, point number one. Point number two, if you look at the zoning draft, short-term rentals, Airbnbs are confined to certain areas of the city, so people need to be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do just want to say before I ask anybody else if they have comments, one of the things, just in brief response to that is, you mentioned community engagement and feedback regarding the zoning proposals. That's, I believe, something that was also discussed at the previous meeting, and it certainly, I can say myself, I'm in favor of having workshops to figure out what it is that the community wants and where we want it. I just, what I want to caution everybody against is that nobody's trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, and nobody's trying to tear down a bunch of houses. That's not what the take-home message from the proposal is. The take-home message, everybody, is that it's a proposal. That's all it is, and it's a starting point. Okay, and so we're all going to work together to get to what the end result's going to be. All right. And that process does not end tonight. It didn't end at the last meeting. It's not going to end at the next meeting. Okay. So this is a collaborative process, and we're all going to get there together. All right. And with that, does anybody else have any other public comment?
If I can add one thing to that.
Sure.
And I also just wanted to clarify as well that the last planning commission meeting was the first discussion on that draft. There was no other discussions, there was no other workshops, no other meetings. So as that was being shared with the community, that was all of our first discussion on what was put in front of us. So there's a lot that needs to get worked through there. And I think we're a long ways away from what that draft was to what the final version is going to look like.
Is there any other public comment? Thanks, Commissioner Saros. Ma'am in the back, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Allison Kapoor. I own a home at 16632 East Jefferson. And this is our first time attending one of these meetings. I'm not very familiar with the community. I was hoping to find out if their proposal included traditional bed and breakfast establishments, or if you're only considering Airbnb. So it's more of a question.
Okay, thank you. And we can address that briefly. Good. Warren, we talked about that at the prior meeting, and Commissioner Evans, who's unfortunately not here, had a lot of information about the differences between short-term rentals, what we think of as a typical Airbnb, and bed and breakfasts. And bed and breakfasts are going to be kind of considered in a separate category. So tonight's discussion is limited to what we commonly think of as an Airbnb. The bed and breakfast discussion is going to be in another portion of the zoning ordinance. That's correct, right?
Yes, it was, yes, we did discuss it last time. From the commission's temperature, I didn't think it was something we were really looking to move towards, but again, that was only our first meeting to go over the draft chapters in the land use table at length, so until it's adopted, anything is, open to discussion and revisiting.
Yeah, would it be, I mean, based on the feedback, right, and obviously it's great to see a lot of engagement here tonight, but would it be possible for us to even share, I mean, when we selected McKenna here, right, we had a rough timeline, right, of the project itself. I wonder if that's maybe something that we could make available somewhere on the planning commission website, right? Obviously, lots of folks are concerned about the zoning ordinance, just to give people a lay of the land of what the time frame is that we're looking at, right? And kind of what the process is, and then people can kind of get a sense of where we are in it, right? So that we know we're very early on, right? And not, working towards adopting anything.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll defer to you, Warren, as to what we can do in terms of the website and everything.
Sure. No, I have a few ideas, and I have a few ideas besides the website on how we're going to continue to roll this thing out. So I do want to be respectful that this is the public comment period, so
Right.
I can share all of that today, but I do think we should resume the public comments.
Sure. And with that in mind, is there anybody else who'd like to make comment tonight? In the back, You can come on up.
Hope you know my back is really bad.
Oh, stay there then, please. Just make sure we can hear you.
I looked at the plans and the transition districts, and they're supposed to be adjacent to business districts, right?
That was in the proposal, yeah.
Yeah, however, the business district along Jefferson from Westchester, Somerset, to Weyburn and Barrington is not included. There is no transition district there. Could you explain to me why that was omitted? I mean, I'm assuming that they would also be delighted to have a little bit more parking.
I can't explain that now, frankly. A couple of reasons. Number one, I don't know the answer right now sitting here. And number two,
I mean, they must have had some guidelines, so why was that business district completely omitted?
I can't answer that right now. And number one, like I said, I don't know how to answer that right now. Number two, this is supposed to be more comment, even though there's been more commentary and back and forth tonight than normal. That's not something I can answer at this point. Anybody else who wants to give comment?
So that's fine.
Oh.
Keep going.
Okay, and you still have time if you'd like to keep going. Okay. Yes, sir. Come on up and state your, introduce yourself, please.
I'm Wes Serrano, 904 906 Beaconsfield, also own the now Portland Space 15324 map. I am an Airbnb or a short-term rental owner, have been for 9 years, believe it or not. We've had one problem in the whole 9 years, and we fixed that problem going forward. And we talk about this on Facebook too. Most of our guests are people that used to live here, right? People coming to visit family, people coming to visit family that are in the hospital, people coming for weddings, people coming for funerals. I would say 85% of my guests fall into one of those categories. I have a few comments here from some guests I asked. Here's one of my guests. We were visiting family in Grosse Pointe, love staying in our own place in our old neighborhood. It's nice to be able to stay in a place of our own without having to stay with family directly. Our brother gathered at Kevin's place to be with our mother in her final days. This was a great place, not having to drive 30 minutes to a hotel. These are just some of the comments, but these are the kind of the guests that we have in Grosse Pointe Park. It's a little bit different than Ann Arbor has been doing something with regulation. I'm all for regulation. I think without regulation, anything crazy not at hand, right? So regulation is good, right? I'm happy to answer questions. I've been doing this for 9 years. I know Dave's been doing it for 10 years. There's good things, there's good regulation, and then there's bad regulation. I just want to make sure that we have regulation that's good for the owners. I'm for local ownership. I think that's great. There's a lot of the things you can do by minuting, trying to make it where you don't have one night minimum. There's a lot of things you can do, and we can look at that. But just as an owner for 9 years, just wanted to get some comment on what I've seen and the positives of short-term rentals. And obviously there are some negatives, but I believe the positives outweigh the negatives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Come on up, sir.
Ren Drever, 1402 Nottingham. There has been a lot of passion. I appreciate seeing the passion. I understand where it comes from. Not everybody here has, but I know one person has woken up to surprise bulldozers. It's not in our distant past. We're all a little bit sensitive to it. When we see things like transition districts and automatically approved parking lots, it makes everybody a little bit upset. I'm glad that people are listening. I look forward to seeing that transition district proposal of it completely removed from any zoning ordinance changes moving forward. It sounds like the commission is listening to that. You were on Facebook, you saw that only 18 out of the 553 people that responded to my Facebook poll said that they wanted more parking lots. And I think that's an important number because last time when the zoning board of appeals sat here and decided we were going to tear down houses, one of the council members said, there's a lot of people in here saying one thing, but I talked to other people and they say they want these houses torn down, they want parking lots. So I think 18 out of 553 saying that they want more parking lots kind of puts that to bed. Second point, in the last meeting on 9/13, the consultant from McKenna talked a lot about a memo. It was referred to over and over again. I didn't see a memo anywhere in the materials. If that could be added in retroactively and moving forward, it'd be helpful for us all to be able to follow along. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment? Come on up, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the Planning Commission. David Kwan. I've lived in Grosse Pointe since 2012, and I've been operating
Airbnb since about 2014, almost 10 years. And I have a hotel management background, so I know a little bit about innkeeping, but really it's become a little bit stronger every year, even with a lot of competition. And as Kevin had mentioned, 80% of my guests grew up here or have family. Some have been repeat 3 or 4 times. I've had maybe 3 or 4 guests who were relocating here and were looking for housing in the Grosse Pointe. And I'm happy to say December's bought right here on Lake Point. And I think they set a record on Lake Point for what they paid, because they had Boston money for a house. And then another family moved up into Grosse Point Farms because they had Californian equity. So it's been good if you're participating in the real estate market, not so good if you're not. But really, I think it's an important amenity to have, because there are no overnight lodging choices really in Grosse Pointe that are favorable to families or to people who are here on business. I had one guest from Spain who was here for about 3 months, and he was working for Toyota in Ann Arbor, but he loved old jazz, and he was able to go to record stores and enjoy music in downtown Detroit. The Electronic Fest is a big draw, except until this year, because people will book 6 months in advance from all over the globe to come in. And this week, I had a request for Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, I can't accommodate them. Members of the Heenan family who are here to visit friends on Beaconsfield. So the walking ability is key. Proximity to family is key. And giving them the privacy within a duplex is just, I don't know. I live right next door. My dad, who turned 99 this week, lives downstairs, and we have a great caregiver. But it's been the perfect compatibility. And I think we serve the community well. So I'm glad to answer any questions. I'm easy to find on Facebook, and be glad to answer more.
Thank you, sir. I see one more hand. Come on up.
My name is John Biss. I've lived on 760 Trombley for 25 years, and my wife and I have operated our upstairs as an Airbnb for the last 2 years. I'd like to raise a couple points of why I think short-term rentals are good for Grosse Pointe Park. I've got a whole armful of reviews I could share with you. I've got 50 of them. They're all 5 stars. I'm never getting less than a 5-star review. And maybe most importantly, there's a study out there that shows that short-term rentals increase property values, which I'm sure is something we're all interested in. For me personally, it's allowed me to invest over $50,000 in my house, which I know has raised in some small way the value of our neighborhood, and allowed our house to be more beautiful. We also know that those visitors are spending in the community. That's good for the community. As others have pointed out, my experience is that all of our guests are Grosse Pointe born folks who are returning for weddings, funerals, etc. And so short-term rentals are really essential service to the community. And looking forward, we're building the SHAP Center here, and it's likely to bring more visitors who are probably not going to want to drive downtown or drive to Roseville to find lodging. I've heard a couple of objections I'd just like to address. The one I like is I want to know who's coming or going. And I understand that concern, but every day, hundreds of maintenance people, help around the house kind of folks, healthcare workers, they come into our community. We don't track them, and so this feels like a very focused concern that's really inappropriate. I know that on either side of my house, we have long-term renters, and it really seems like they change about every 3rd month. So this notion that they're gonna stay on a long-term basis doesn't seem correct to me. The other one I hear, and some others have addressed it, is I don't want to live next to a party house. Well, I kind of chuckle at this one, right? Nobody picks Grosse Pointe Park because they think they're going to Cancun. They come here because they want to be with family. In fact, the only time police have ever come to my house is when one of my guests locked keys in his car, and the police were kind enough to help him get out of there. So I'd be interested, if that was a prevailing concern, if we could draw some data from the police department on how often there have been nuisance complaints against short-term rentals, and is that disproportionate against other forms of where people live? And then very quickly, I would personally be all for whatever sort of licensing you want to add. I think that's an important part of what we want to do. I think minimum stays are very important. We shouldn't allow one nights. Local owner presence, the fact that I live downstairs, I'm sure keeps, any shenanigans down to a minimum or none. And I think we should be very vigilant about fining or revoking the license for anyone who violates the rules. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm happy to show our short-term rental if anybody wants to see it.
Thank you. All right, any other public comment at this time? There's another hand, sir. Come on up, please.
My name is Richard O'Neill. We have an Airbnb in our home. With one exception, people were coming here to visit family and friends. One young man was in an internship with the Pistons. And the place he was staying burned down. He needed a place to go. So he stayed with us for about 3 months. People are coming for a reason. They're coming to visit their family, for weddings, for special occasions, graduations. Where else are they? The choices are here or downtown or somewhere out Roseville. So we've never had a neighbor complaining. We've never had any complaints. I think if you're going to do something, regulation is probably a good idea so that people are responsible. But other than that, I think it's a really good thing for this community because these people are coming home, basically.
Thank you. I think I saw one more hand for public comment in the back, sir.
Hi, I'm Leo Marco. I live on Beaconsfield. So my wife and I are fairly new to the community, and we had, in order to allow people to visit us, we've actually used the Airbnbs instead of Mr. Kwan's Airbnb, and it's been a good experience because it's just down the street. It's very local, as opposed to having to put them in downtown. My parents down there or other places, we can just walk and meet them instead of them being so far away. So it's been nice having that option. And as a duplex owner, being able to do like a short-term rental thing in our own home would be great as well. That's something that we're looking to do. But I think if we didn't have these Airbnbs, then local accommodations would be basically none. And so it also allows for the local businesses to thrive too, because a lot of them are fairly close to that, which I think is advantageous. So I'm glad that we have those options, and hopefully we can continue that.
Thank you. All right, any more public comment at this time? Going once, twice? Okay, seeing no hands. Let's move on then to item 5, unfinished business. Warren, I suppose I turn it over for you if we have any unfinished business.
I think what I'll do now, because I know people are interested and we'll probably have our largest audience online at this point in the meeting, before people start to go to bed and stuff. Where do we go next? So today we're kind of focusing on the short-term rentals. Then we have a meeting scheduled for Tuesday, October 24th. At that point, the balance of the chapters we didn't go over before are going to be presented and reviewed by this body for the first time. That will mark the point where the whole commission has, and the public have seen the first, draft of every chapter. And then as part of the scope of work, we still have to do our 2 open houses. So after we finish that commission meeting on the 24th, we'll get the open house scheduled probably early November. And at that point, I'm working with McKenna, we're kind of envisioning stations kind of set up around the room, maybe not this room, but where then kind of be kind of focus areas too. I want to talk about parking. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about that. That format may change, you know, and we're going to have again multiple open houses, but
That's similar to how we did the master plan.
yes, I wasn't here for that part, but yeah, a
Same
very
idea.
similar idea. And also leading up to that event, though, I've been speaking with McKenna on, we're going to create little, whether it's one page or like image, you know, see on Facebook, scroll through things. We're going to introduce every zoning district. So I'm going to kind of do a countdown to the open house where, hey, it's Monday, state residential, Tuesday, next NR1, and continue that way. That way we can kind of build some momentum and, you know, share information that way too. I think that'll be helpful to kind of try and inform everybody as they come into that first open house. And again, we've kind of all said here, it's going to be months before this ordinance even, you know, we're even going to think about holding the public hearing, which again, we're required to have the public hearing at this body. And ultimately it is the city council that will adopt the ordinance. So that's just a little bit of kind of what the next few weeks and months are going to look like. Again, at least 2 open houses, we're going to do that online thing. I'm going to consolidate all the chapters we've had before in the memo that we had last meeting. I'm going to put that online. I'll make a separate subpage on the Planning Commission website so that people, if they ever want to see all the documents. And just to clarify, so that meeting in September, that was the first time we reviewed draft chapters of the zoning ordinance, but it wasn't the first Planning Commission meeting we've had where these topics were discussed. Believe, you know, the idea of a transition district and all the other ones, for example, I believe was first enunciated much earlier in the year at one of our first meetings. And then then we had another meeting later on where we kind of devoted just to signage and then the kind of residential design, you know, new residential construction design standards, things like that. So we've been going on this for a little bit, but the first time we saw draft chapter specifically was again in September. And what I'm going to do going forward is I'll make sure that when we do the draft chapters, we'll date them because, you know, we had a comment on it was draft 3, what happened to draft 1 and 2. That's kind of just me working with McKenna. So we're document as we basically, you know, I kind of work and try and fine tune some of these things before we bring them to you. So that's where that nomenclature came from. It wasn't like, oh, you know, that was your first draft. So it was draft 3 on the, you know, kind of the behind the scenes version, but the first draft, you know, were sent to the public. So that's where that came from. We're not going to have that. We're going to break up the chapters separately now. We'll date stamp them so we won't have any sort of confusion on that regard to going forward. So that's kind of where I want to go in the future. Happy to talk about the transition district at the 24th. I think a lot of it is going to come even after that, just because we do have the other chapters to finish. So I want to get the full work product out there. But like I said, we're months away from, you know, any sort of, I think, consensus on the final document.
Okay, so in other words, stay tuned to the city website and there'll be community engagement sessions that are
To
going to
come,
be,
yeah.
that are going to be announced, and we would love everyone to come, I'm sure. So, okay, in terms of unfinished business, does anybody else have anything to have regarding unfinished business? All right, so let's move on then to new business with our discussion on short-term rentals. Finally, we're getting to the good stuff today, everybody. And Warren, I'll let you kick it off if you would, please, and help us start the conversation.
Sure. This part I'm more comfortable behind the podium as I'm going through information and presenting. So I'm going to move, but then I'll come back to the discussion.
Are there copies of this for the public?
Good one here, I think.
I looked on the website, I didn't see anything that's made this afternoon.
So what I have right here is a presentation that the city manager gave at the August meeting. I also have some handouts, just of some Airbnbs. I have more up here. There's usually some Airbnbs that we found.
Warren, do you have the note for the gallery? Thank you.
I don't have enough for everyone in the gallery. So I put this together just a few hours ago. I wanted to get the freshest data possible on Airbnbs in our town. So I'm gonna be adding this, again, the presentation is thing one, it's just gonna be notes that I'm gonna reference that Nick presented in August. It is on our website. I'm gonna re-upload it and I'll upload these other things that we're gonna interact with and encounter today. But going forward, to start off, short-term rentals. Typically a short-term rental, it's the use of a property anywhere from 28 to 38 days is the maximum duration of a stay. That's kind of how, what the textbook definition is that's used around the country and around the state. And so we know they exist, and what does this mean in the park? So I was on Airbnb this morning, preparing for the nice talk. I pulled Airbnb's website up. It does not show addresses. Sometimes you can find it in like captions on photos. Otherwise, the only way to get it is to book it. I wasn't gonna book myself 28 Airbnb stays, but it's important when you're looking at Airbnb though, I'm looking at Grosse Pointe Park. It's hard to get a 100% accurate number, but we can kind of get a ballpark. And what I found is there was anywhere from 20 to 28 listings. Now, some of these were one room and then the whole house. So 2 listings, 1 property. And there's no clear search feature. So some of them were actually houses on Alter in Detroit. Some of it, or just on the north side of map, that the map kind of moves them around. It doesn't show you the exact locations. So what I printed out today and what we passed around was just kind of a selection of what some of these listings, not all of them show the exterior of the home. So they didn't show the exterior. I kind of wanted to just focus on what could I see, photo of listed, what could I easily, identify what that house was. And again, this is stuff I did today. I wanted to get the most recent information because these things do change. So what does this mean for Grosse Pointe Park? Well, it means that we have them. We have Airbnbs. We've heard from some of the community owners here that they've been doing an Airbnb style or short-term rental arrangement, in some cases for quite some time. And as I looked at these Airbnbs, and again, they're not exactly where they are on the map. If you look at the map, many of them were kind of concentrated in the multifamily districts. That would be the current RD district, which is primarily the Cabbage Patch area, and then the RC district, which is the Harcourt, Trombley, what's the other one right? Okay, and I think it's one side of technically the zoning district.
Trombley.
Yes, it's one side of Trombley, Harcourt, and Bedford.
No better.
It starts with a B. There's one block that's actually zoned for it. It's one of the streets that starts with a B. The name's escaping me at the moment. But that's kind of where they were clustered as of today. They're mostly in those districts. There was a few other ones. Again, the first one I have, 1404 Devonshire, that's not in one of those zoning districts. That's a corner lot on Devonshire and Charlevoix. So we know they exist in Grosse Pointe Park. There's about 20 to 25 listings as of today. Again, there's some are a room, some are the whole house. Sometimes the photos are the same, you can tell. Other times you can't. Now, how do we deal with these now? Well, we don't. We have no language that speaks to this type of land use, at least in the short-term sense. We have a long-standing practice and law of requiring, if there's a rental property, typically in the longer term, 6 months or more, those we have a licensing procedure for. They have to get the certificate of occupancy inspection every 2 years for rental properties and commercial properties. Typically, your average homeowner, if they're not doing a rental, they're only doing CFO when they're about to sell their house. So that's kind of how we've been dealing with rentals, but it's also I think policy is really important in kind of what's the causes, how do you define the issue or the problem, which I don't want to use the word problem in this case. But for us, it's largely, we get phone calls all the time on, can I do this? Can I not do this? Is this okay? Is this not okay? And we don't really have an answer. And it kind of came to a head, in the last few months, we kind of introduced the concepts to the city council. And then because the planning commission is the body that deals with zoning ordinance and land uses, and we're also working on zoning ordinance rewrite at the same time. That's why we kind of put this issue front and center, for us this evening to consider what we want to do. A few other things, Grosse Points. The Grosse Pointe City has, in some districts, they allow short-term rentals. They don't have a long policy on inspections and violations. They may kind of incorporate it with their more traditional long-term C of O process, but the actual ordinance that they adopted within the last 24 months was basically a page, and it was like definition, and then where are they allowed? Speaking with the other Grosse Pointes, for example, Grosse Pointe Shores and Grosse Pointe Farms, they say, well, our minimum rental period in our code is 1 year. We don't have such regulation. The problem is when I was on Airbnb this morning, I found Airbnb listings in both of those communities. So again, that's why I think it's good to have a policy in place on these. Another topic to consider before we kind of dive in to the discussion is the role of the state. I've been in local government for about 5 years. And ever since, time after time, there are bills that are generated that would govern short-term rentals in the state. They vary. There's a lot of support, there's a lot of opposition to them, and none of them have ever advanced, to the governor's desk to sign into law. I know a few weeks ago, there was at least one draft that was being circulated. I don't remember which chamber. But what they all have in common is that local governments won't be able to ban short-term rentals. That's kind of one of the defining features of them is if they're going to regulate this are some of the stipulations, and it goes on to some other things like creating a statewide registry of Airbnbs, doing special kind of local occupancy taxes, things like that. Again, it's a lot of different things that have come and gone in the last few years, but again, have not made it into law. I think that's important to know that these forces are working or have been trying to work. And I think they'll kind of wait and see what the state's going to do approach while we have them here. Again, isn't the best policy anymore. And like I said, I think that regardless of whatever we end up doing, the city, we have infrastructure in place, meaning mostly staff capacity and other things and processes and paperwork we're doing this all the time. We have just under 700 rental properties now. About 21-25% of all properties in Grosse Pointe Park are rentals. So that makes us different, than the other Grosse Pointes and different than many other communities. The communities that are at the forefront of this type of regulation are typically your west side of the state resort communities like Ludington or Grand Haven. A lot of the more bedroom communities, they haven't really had to deal with this a ton. There are a few, like Ann Arbor for one, Ferndale, those are some that have done short-term or rental ordinances. But again, a lot of people are still kind of trying to wait and see what's the state going to do approach. So we covered what an Airbnb is. We covered how they are in the park right now, some of the other Grosse Pointes. We talked about state preemption, have a list of, again, talk about where some of them are. That's kind of all I have prepared for like my introduction to this discussion. And kind of now what I'm thinking we should do is kind of maybe go down the row and everybody kind of say, what they're thinking at this point in time, and then probably come away with some questions that if you do want to regulate these things or allow these things, what are some of the things we would like to see in a draft ordinance that we could then come back to this body, because it is this body to start, because it's a zoning ordinance amendment. And by law, this body has to have a public hearing on that amendment. There'll probably be a regulatory component to the licensing and everything, but that's why you're all involved, is because there is a land use decision component to this, and that's contained in the zoning ordinance, which requires planning commission involvement. So happy to answer any questions on anything I've said right now, but otherwise, I'll go return to my other spots and we can start the conversation.
All right, thanks, Warren. going from one end to the other sounds great to me because I'm in the middle. So, Commissioner Taylor or Vice Chair Zaki, does either one of you want to start?
I mean, I could start. I have like sort of a concern and a couple of broad thoughts. The first is I think that we do need some kind of regulation, as the Airbnb owners said, like some structure, some scaffolding seems to be appropriate, given the demand for Airbnbs in the community and also the nature of the people that have been using the Airbnbs, right? Come for a wedding or a funeral, like some regulation to sort of maintain that existing practice seems to make sense to me. I have concerns, and I don't really have any suggestions, but concerns about them being concentrated in one part of the city. I think that's something we need to be careful about. And I have concerns about them being bought as houses being bought as investment properties, with owners that are far away and not really ingrained in the fabric of our community. So those are my so one thought and then two concerns. I'll kick it over to you.
One, thank you for the public comment that we had tonight on the short-term rentals. We had, I think, some very good insights on what's it like being a short-term rental operator here. And I think that's really important to hear that side of what is the boots on the ground property owner experiencing, who are the folks that are staying in these properties. So I think that insight was very helpful. I don't think we had anyone that spoke out against short-term rentals. Being a real estate broker, this is something that I deal with quite a bit. This topic is one of the most probably controversial that there is in the real estate industry right now. So I figured I'd just share what are some of the flip sides of the coin here. What are some of the things that I hear that are the negatives to these short-term rentals? First and foremost, a concern in some communities is if you are taking, and most of the time it happens in properties that are typical rental houses. So multifamily properties, smaller homes. That's your typical property that's going to be an Airbnb property. You're then effectively removing some rental supply from the market for long-term tenants that are going to be a year plus. So move supply, the effect could be that rents increase from there. So that's a concern of short-term rentals, but I think we can combat that with regulation, with restricting the amount of licenses that we give to short-term rentals. So I think there is a workaround for that. Another negative, and this is one that I actually wrestle with quite a bit, is my opinion of short-term rentals is that it is a commercial use now. And you are operating a commercial use in a residential district. So that is something that, from a definition standpoint, that I think that a lot of these bills that are put in front of the state aren't really addressing. And so I don't know if maybe just the definition of my viewpoint of that is incorrect, but that is the way that I look at that. So with that, and also the concern about investors buying properties for short-term rentals. The economics of short-term rentals versus long-term rentals, you can make more money on operating a short-term rental, but buckle up because it is a full contact property management. You got to be there. It takes a lot of effort. So, we own and operate real estate. We have a property management company where we manage well over 100 units in the park. I don't have a single Airbnb. I will not have a single Airbnb because I am not tough enough to deal with the day-to-day stuff on it. So with that said, I do think that there is a need and a benefit to the community for this. I think the right way to look at this is governing it, restricting the number of licenses based on zoning district, having a distance between one Airbnb to another, and treat it the same way we treat the boat slips at the park. Is you put your name in the hat for the boat slip, once one becomes available, then it goes to the next person in line. So I think that's a way to try to delegate the licenses. And I don't know if we can give preference to people that are local, to Grosse Pointe Park residents on those licenses. I don't know if there's any, regulations around that, if you can show favoritism for something like that. But I think that's the way to go about it. I do have a concern that if you have properties, just specifically talk about a home on Windmill Point on the water side, if that's operating as a short-term rental, does that then open the door that, well, it's an Airbnb, but really this is now a wedding venue? And, then you have a ton of people staying in some of these large estates. So I think that's another thing that we're going to need to address is what else could this open us up to. But I think I do agree, though. I think that there is, given what the community is here in Grosse Pointe, I think a lot of the short-term rental concerns that other communities face, I don't think we would necessarily face them here. So maybe the right way to do this is we do a 2 to 3 year trial period of whatever we decide on, and then that is revisited again at the end of that trial period once we have a real case study on, hey, this is what worked, this is what didn't work. So those are my thoughts. That was long, sorry. Took a lot of them. No, I'd say my thoughts fall in line a lot with what my colleagues have said already, right? I mean, it's very clear that there is a need that these short-term rentals serve. I do appreciate all the folks here that are operators, right, coming out to give their perspective. And obviously, right, it's particularly the fact that this is a way for a lot of folks that leave the area, right, to come back and re-engage with their family, right, and come back for special events. And that's very, very important. Especially when you look at the surrounding areas, right, and the lack of any type of hotel capacity, right, that's anywhere near Grosse Pointe Park. So I think they serve a really important purpose. My concern is, in line with the both of you, right, I am a little, I do think some limitation or some, I'd say control over density of short-term rentals is pretty important, right? We're a community where a lot of those short-term rental properties would come in contact with or come in direct conflict with long-term rentals, right? And we're also an area that's got I'd say a pretty acute concern on, the public school enrollment rolls, right? So I'm a little bit, I know that the impact right on short-term rentals will probably be most acutely felt in those same neighborhoods. So I don't know, I think, you both Jimmy raised the concern probably more eloquently than I did. I am really interested, I'd say, in getting the community feedback on this, right? I'd say obviously not just those that operate, but that's very much appreciated, but also, those that live in areas that have maybe seen short-term rentals crop up nearby, right? Some of their experiences and just as members of the community, kind of the feedback, which I'm glad that we have so many folks here today. So hopefully when we get to the second public comment period, we'll get to hear some more. But they took a lot of the low-hanging fruit.
That's why you're after them. Is so you can
Right,
get
whatever, perhaps in there, yeah.
No, I share some of the same concerns, and at first blush for me when you talk about short-term rentals, my immediate reaction is no, I don't want short-term rentals in the park. And just by way, and I'm not sophisticated in any of this, and Commissioner Saros certainly is way more so than I am. So I kind of just look at my personal experiences with it, and a lot of it is you read online about how renters are priced out of all these big cities in Europe, and I know it's different. We're not Rome, we're not Paris, and I get that, but there's a huge housing shortage in a lot of these big cities because of short-term rentals and big management companies buying up a bunch of apartments and then renting them out to people like us who are going to Europe for a week. And I never really thought about how different it might be here. And so I found the public comment really illuminating. And it seems like it reflects the spirit to me at least, of what Airbnb was supposed to be in the beginning, where maybe you own a two-family duplex and you don't currently have a renter, a long-term renter, and you're looking to make some extra side income. It's not a business for you. It is a supplement for an unused property that you already own. And even here, I spend a fair amount of time in Cleveland for reasons that I won't get into now, but I have stayed at 3 different apartments in the same building over the course of the last 3 years, in the time that I've been using Airbnb in Cleveland. And my takeaway from that, and I see people coming and going every time I go to this particular apartment building, and it's a great building, it's right downtown, it's wonderful, but I think a lot of people buy units there. In Cleveland, obviously downtown Cleveland is more similar to downtown Detroit, but it's this similar kind of, it's a similar kind of city, similar kind of population that we deal with here. And I think that people buy units in this one particular building and rent them out for people who are visiting. And the man that I rented the last apartment from in this building lived in Hawaii. And I can't figure out why the heck he has an apartment in downtown Cleveland. So, I think about those things and I worry about that too. And so it's really interesting to me to hear people say that people use VRBO here to come home, to visit family and to go to weddings and to go to funerals and things like that. And it kind of gives me a different perspective on whether it's something we want here. And so I'm interested, like you are, Devin, to hear what not just people who own short-term rental properties here have to say, but also what the public at large in the community has to say, because it's more nuanced than I thought the discussion would be. Because I was ready to come in here and just say, no, let's not have it in the park. No way, no how. And I'm starting to think, at least based on what I've heard today, that maybe I'm in the minority on that. So I'm always open to have my mind changed. And so I'm grateful for everybody else who's here. Warren, are we skipping you since you gave a whole prepared thing already? Mayor Hodges?
Thank you, Chair Coletta. Nicely said, by the way. I think you found a good balance. And thank you to the community and my colleagues. I think this has been a really healthy and productive discussion, and we're hearing a lot of common sense as part of it. I too have conducted some research, including meeting with some of the folks that are here in the room as well as elsewhere who've been kind enough to share their experience as well as share different resources. And I have advanced them to city staff with toolkits and different documents like that are based on experience and really help us understand how we can govern this use. Because I think the practical reality is, Commissioner Coletta, they're here. We're not going to have a choice. We don't have the option of saying yes or no. And if we did say no, we would likely be exposing the city to legal exposure. So, and which is based on one of the articles I found just recently in Crain's Detroit Business about a resort community in Michigan who is being sued for trying to ban short-term rentals. So I think there's a certain practical reality. So the goal then of the discussion should really be centered around how do we manage them. Some of the other research is the Michigan Municipal League, that's more focused on the bills. But given some of the dialogue that you get to hear as part of those listservs, you can get a sense of what other communities are facing. Thank you, Warren, as well, for sharing some of the potential drafts that we could be looking at. So from that, and I too would like to hear more from the community. I think, we're in this honest professional process, right? And it should be collaborative. So, and done in a very healthy, productive way. So I hope we get that opportunity to continue to dialogue with our community, however that might be, whether it's direct communication or in the future discussions that we might be having. And when I referred to workshops in my post, it was more really calling this a workshop because and I think that vernacular has been used, but we're not making decisions, right? We're in dialogue and we're having a conversation about this, which I think is important. So for me, the sweet spot is to figure out how we minimize the negatives and maximize the positives with really good governance. So as we go forward with this process, that's what I will be looking forward to focusing on. And then if I don't go home, it's my 33rd wedding anniversary to enjoy part of the evening with my husband. I'm going to need a short-term rental. So I would like to hear what my colleague, Commissioner Vitaki, has to say, but after that, I do plan to leave to go avoid being the next customer of a short-term rental.
I don't know if we need a motion to excuse you or not, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
Well, I'll be short, because going last, I don't have much original to add. I share the concerns that others have articulated. I think there's ways around that. I would support, if possible, having something written in there where we would give preference to permanent residents. Maybe not just in Grosse Pointe Park, but of the points. I would support, limits on the number of people per bedroom, limits on the number of cars per person, caps on the total, caps on the total per block. I think all those measures would really get, take care of most of the concerns. It's just a matter of where to calibrate those. I think a lot of it has to do with, I know Warren said that he has staffing capacity to handle the enforcement. I don't know if he means he has staffing capacity to handle 50 or 150. Whatever that number is, we probably got to set a cap on it. Because, it seems like it's going to be a lot more work. I think one thing we'll have to do is kind of very clearly define not just the responsibilities of the owners, but also of maybe the city with regard to how we're going to administrate these licenses. Like, what are our obligations in terms of when someone applies to a license? Do we have to give notification to the neighbors? I know when there's, like a zoning variance, we have to send out letters within a radius, I think. We'll probably want to talk about whether we need to do the same thing for a new, I understand we have them there and they've been working fine, and I'm sure the neighbors have no problem with them, but in terms of new ones going forward, that may be an adjustment for certain neighborhoods. So I think that's all I have.
Well, anybody have anything else to add here as commissioner? Anybody? Anybody?
I have a question for the old operators in the room, a little unorthodox, but
And Mayor Hodges, real quick, I see you packing up. Thanks for being here.
Motion to be
Thanks,
excused.
thanks to our first husband as well. I'm sorry, Warren, go ahead.
oh, sure, I was gonna, so the operators here, just so I can remember, do all of you occupy these rentals, or are you the off-site investors? Of the ones who spend?
I live next door and I'm in the, so I'm essentially not, but I did just want to add one thing. The criminal background check that every apartment owner is supposed to do, that's got to go, because, half the people in the world probably have a marijuana violation. It's just ridiculous, especially for the guests here. I think most people charge well over $100 a night. And it's considered by Attorney General Holder that it was discriminatory. And it's ridiculous when I've got judges, doctors, people convalescing, family here. They're professionals, generally speaking, and then just, say, I kind of ignore that because I can judge even how they write their sentences, what their background is. And I just think that's not fair to anybody these days, since it's discriminatory. And that just has to go, because it would never stop seeing the court challenge for long-term rental or short-term.
Okay. Does anybody have a different answer to the initial question? Thanks for expounding on that, but in terms of people owning and occupying, just take turns, you're all adults.
Occupy, one technical point, if you found 25 today, there's probably 40 because the other 15 are booked and they wouldn't show up in your search.
Appreciate that. And everybody else?
I live in the woods.
Okay.
My house is going to the park and
Okay.
I'm gonna occupy.
Okay.
it's my old house and moved down the street.
I live in the house.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you again, I wanted to get that feel again.
Yeah, that's different from my practical experience.
I run one in the Adirondacks. It's a 9-hour drive. I'm about to throw in the towel on it. It's another 100-year-old house with a great porch, but 100-year-old houses just require too much work.
It sounds like you should move to the Adirondacks. All right, Warren, anything else you wanted to to mention?
No questions for our friends here. At this point, again, it's your workshop. I'm happy to answer questions. Getting the sense of is that preparing a draft ordinance, is the next logical step. I'm probably going to incorporate in it something that, I don't think you can strictly limit, owner occupied versus others, but I think you can choose to allow of each kind, perhaps. So that's kind of one approach that some communities have taken, that I think would be good to articulate in an initial draft. For me, I think the biggest what if with the draft would be, again, based on today's listings, they're mostly in the districts where, we have duplexes and quadplexes and things like that. But is this something we want to allow in any residential, or really, quite frankly, if it's an upstairs above a business, if it's, an apartment the business owner would like to rent out, I'm kind of the opinion to propose they could be anywhere. But again, I have, that's kind of our council's determination to make ultimately. So
Yeah,
I don't want it to be my bad idea. I don't want it to be my good idea. I just wanted to throw it out there.
we'll give you credit either way. I think what a lot of the stuff that Commissioner Pataki mentioned could address any concerns about having them limited to particular parts of the city. So it makes sense to me, at least at first blush now, to have it available everywhere. And I guess the question is though, do you know what kind of limitations we can put in place on these? So he mentioned, Commissioner Pataki mentioned total number of licenses, total number of units per block, things like that. I don't know if total number of licenses per individual is something that we could consider to discourage property management companies from coming in and buying up a bunch of places. Are those things that we can do?
Those specific three you just said are all have been implemented in the state of Michigan.
And you've given us, I think, 3 draft ordinances, but are those things included, just so everybody knows, are those things included in those ordinances?
In part, I said those a few days ago, kind of just to get the juices flowing. And again, I think the first ordinance that we'll do will be one that's kind of written for our specific sense. I wasn't intending to kind of work through any of those today. It was more just, hey, we're going to talk about this. Here's a range of communities that have, dealt with this in a regulatory fashion. So, but again, to those specific 3, yes, I have seen regulations that just kind of lay out, good neighbor guidelines have to be posted. When you have your permit, the permit number must be listed like in your posting, on the website, whether it's Vrbo or Airbnb. Sharing good neighbor guidelines with, having the local contact if you are not, a local. That's something I think we even have now with our current rentals. Unit registration, there has to be some type of local. I think it's defined as 50 miles. Don't quote me on that. But all of those are things we can do.
Okay.
I'd add that rather than having it be a certain amount of licenses per block, is probably distance between like a density. But then you have to think about if you have like.
Our blocks are huge.
Right.
I don't like the per block regulation.
Right, well, not only that, the different blocks and different densities. So, like much different. So that range is a lot. Then you look at too, if you have like a 4-unit apartment building, can someone operate all 4 units? Does that one license give them the ability to rent out all those units as Airbnb, or is it per dwelling? So.
Same with rooms, right, as opposed to.
Yeah, right, I guess, yeah, same with rooms.
Right. Right, I think the 3 that you sent us, they all were universal, that it's one for dwelling.
Yeah, it depends on how you define dwelling unit. Some people.
Yeah, so that example of 4 apartments would be 4 nice rooms.
Right, and there's some investors that I've seen that in Detroit that have multifamily buildings that run Airbnbs, and they are by far the nicest properties in the block and the nicest units. And I think because the checks and balances that the reviews and the ratings, that's a direct correlation to their income that they end up making, what they can charge. So that actually ends up think, policing the quality of the housing more than what a 12-month rental does. But I think that's something that we gotta look at is, if you have a multifamily dwelling, is it a license for the entire building, or are we gonna do it for, each per unit? And I don't know if it doesn't matter either way, I don't know.
I don't know either. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no,
Gonna mention, I do have a 4-unit and it's all 4 of them are Airbnb. Like I spent $100,000 improving this property, right? So that's kind of, and it is, like you said, it's probably one of the nicest ones on the street.
Right.
I would not have done that, right?
Yeah, that's why I think, and like the feedback I get from operators is, because in order for you to charge a premium, I mean, you gotta have a premium product out there. You're gonna spend more money than what a typical rental unit's gonna be, so maybe it does make sense to have them be per tax lot versus per dwelling. And I do think that we have a trial period here of, let's get our case study, let's use the next 2-3 years to see how this goes and give us the flexibility of like an easy way to amend this one way or another if we need to. Because we can't just tomorrow with no guardrails whatsoever, right?
Yeah, right, that's a good point.
My question is, you mentioned, right, that the state's pretty explicit that you cannot disallow, right, an Airbnb.
That's not what the
also-
state says.
Okay.
It's just the legislation has been circulated but never advanced. I want to be clear about
Okay,
that.
gotcha.
There's no state law that says we can or can't,
Mostly the question was just, if there is a precedent of allowing it within, in some of these other places around the state, right, allowing it within certain zoning districts or not, right? I don't know if that's the case, right? If looking at it, like what you brought up about the, estate residential versus a multifamily. It's a good point, right? An estate residential as an Airbnb essentially becomes like an event. Potentially like an event space, you have a 15,000 square foot house. I mean, you can.
Airbnb has like no party policies and stuff. I don't know how strictly that's enforced, but.
Yeah, I've never seen the Airbnb card come around. But you can limit a number of occupants, right? So maybe can we do that as a municipality? Limit the number of occupants for can we do it effectively?
It's something to look into. I think that when you get into occupancy, there's all the safety codes with the building and stuff that those have a role to play. I'm not prepared to kind of comment further on that, but that's something we can look at.
Zoning can handle that. A single family zone, I can understand why the people, this grass looks like it's been cut by hand, don't want an Airbnb on their lawn. But, Cabbage Patch with its walking distance to commercial for the people who come and visit and work hand in hand, that's probably the comment they make the most. It's not that I give them nice toilet paper. It's based on, we love walking to the new bakery and Brine and whatever else.
My concern is, and this already happens, I mean, you have some of the larger homes in Grosse Pointe that will rent out their home for a wedding or for, that's already happening. So would this pour gas on, something that I don't think has been problematic yet, but, could that cause bigger issues?
I mean, I think there's just a formula for, you get 2 per bedroom or something like that.
Yeah.
Are they limited to just the RC, RD, or is it going to be allowed within single family homes?
Yeah, and that's a question, that's a question that we don't have an answer to right now. That's one of the things that's gonna be addressed going forward when we do all these community sessions and when we actually get a draft ordinance. So that it's premature to say yes or no either way on that. I think that's one of the questions that we all want to try and answer.
But you have the draft math out that shows that very thing, right? It shows Airbnbs in some zones and it shows bed and breakfasts in others. I realize it's not final, but it's out there because I looked at it myself. So look at your map.
Right.
I'm sorry, on the master plan or on the?
No, on the zoning
ordinance, on the table,
Look at the zoning
the proposed one?
Yes, if you look at the map, which I did yesterday.
Yeah.
There are short-term rentals like Airbnbs in certain zones.
Yeah.
And then there's bed and breakfast category, along.
Yeah, right,
That's true.
right.
The point is, it may not be final, but it's not like there's not a draft out there that.
Yeah, right.
doesn't-
Yeah, that was one of our comments from the last meeting. I think we all pretty much agreed, like bed and breakfast on somebody to stay residential, I don't think anyone would take too favorably to that.
I just think the public needs to understand that there is this draft, and this is what people will be commenting against, not that it doesn't exist. Right?
That's true. There is a draft and it's a
Right.
draft, and this is the first meaningful conversation we've had about short-term rentals at all as a commission. So it's premature to say one way or another
Essentially,
what the final ordinance is gonna say, because this is the first time any of us has ever addressed it as a body.
Right.
So, with that, I don't know if there's anybody else on the commission that has anything else to add in terms of the discussion on short-term rentals here, and I do see a hand raised, I'm not ignoring you, miss. And we're gonna have another public comment period, so in terms of discussion from the commission as it relates to short-term rentals, does anybody have any other thoughts by way of moving things forward? I've seen we have our zoning guru from McKinney here in the front row, and he's been furiously taking notes. And he's been very engaged in this discussion, and I'm sure that whatever amended proposed ordinances we see are gonna consider a lot of the comments that have been made today. And it's gonna improve and go forward, continue incorporating comments both from the commission and from the public and community engagement sessions. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being so diligent in your efforts to make sure that everybody's heard and everything's taken into account. So if there's no more discussion from the commission on short-term rentals, anything from you, Warren?
I do just want to, next steps. So we've got the 24th. Just, this topic in particular, take a lot of the air out of the room, not that I'm against 5-6 hour meetings or anything, but I just wanted to understand how do we want to move forward on this one in particular, because again, this is I wouldn't necessarily say it's the most pressing issue we're wrestling with during this time of the zoning ordinance, but at the end of the day, from the regulatory standpoint, we could move more quickly on solving this single issue than if we're still working through all of the other things, at least as far as, the licensing,
Okay.
Or other things. So we can move more quickly than maybe the full ordinances. So again, I don't know how we want to proceed. I want to try and tack something on the 24th, or we do have another meeting set. Actually, it's the day after the election day would be our next regular meeting. I believe that's Wednesday the 8th.
Okay.
So maybe we get the draft together, or we get it out, community a week or so in advance.
Yeah.
And we kind of revisit this during that meeting, and then meanwhile, we will have finished the balance of the zoning ordinance, and then, we kind of move into the workshop phases and open house rather. I'm just wondering what we want to do. If you say, Warren, get us draft that, next week, we make that happen. We can,
Yeah,
get a quorum together. I want to just lay the groundwork because.
I don't think we need to move that quickly. I think we need, my personal thought, and everybody tell me if you disagree, is that before there's a real draft ordinance of the Airbnb short-term rental issue, I think that a community engagement session first would be really appropriate, so that we had feedback to send to McKenna.
or should we have that draft for that discussion?
Yeah, that's the question, right?
Yeah.
So, I'll, if there's a majority of everybody here who has feelings either way, I
feel like-
I'll adopt either one is my position, I guess, if everybody else feels one way or another.
I feel like what we move towards, right, is, we certainly understand, right, that there's a lot of folks that see the value in short-term rentals as a part of the community, but everything that we've talked about here has also involved some sort of, licensing or control. And when you kind of look back at our draft ordinance, right, and Gary brought up a good point about it being listed in the draft that was reviewed at last meeting. Everything, I think in the few places where it was referenced, zoning, it was all permitted, right? By right, it was all a situation where we enact some sort of licensing, what does that, some sort of approval process, right, more stringent than, hey, I own the property, I'm just gonna make Airbnb, right? What does that become from or is that basically get carved out of kind of like permitted land use and put in a separate section like you're mentioning?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because I'm personally, I'm not sure how it would fit into, right, with what we're talking about, right? How does it fit into the draft that we saw previously?
Yeah, I think largely the only, communities do this different ways. Sometimes the only thing in the zoning ordinance is which box, what's filled in the box on the table of land uses. And then there's like a sidecar ordinance that actually is like the regulatory process, which is not always in the zoning ordinance. It's part of just the regular general police powers of the city code. I've also seen zoning ordinances where it all was in the zoning ordinance. So if we were to keep it all in the zoning ordinance, again, it's right now we do have I think it is permitted in several of the zoning districts, but we don't have any regulations attached to it at the moment. But it would be, that's the next step, is to kind of figure out and work through. And then I have seen, I think some communities have done the non-owner occupied as a special land use versus a permitted use. And all of these things, we'll have to run by the attorney because people challenge these types of ordinances all the time. We'll need to make sure that when we come to the table, we're fairly confident that, this will be able to withstand those type of challenges and actually work how we want it to. So
we also don't want to make it so cumbersome a process that we basically just invite people to list an Airbnb without any sort of administration, right? If we make it requiring a special land use coming before planning commission, probably gonna get a lot of, you're gonna go in and refresh and see a bunch of different ones that you've never seen before, right, on the map.
In terms of the work of the commission and the community's interest, it seems like we're gonna have a lot on our plates for our meeting in a month. Like just with the next revision, the next draft of the zoning ordinance and the map and the community engagement around that, my inclination would be to focus on that and perhaps put the short-term rental or a draft ordinance on that for the November meeting, like something like that. That might help line up the workflow a little bit better. We might be able to draft a short-term rental ordinance that dovetails a little bit more nicely based on the discussion.
Yeah, and that would at least give us a starting point, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
And probably, my sense is that if there is a draft that we're being asked to consider, that would probably invite a lot more community engagement than just everybody come tell us your thoughts. So would it be too onerous for McKenna to come up with something, knowing that it's just a draft, knowing that it's not anything that's going to be approved the first time you see it, and knowing that nothing's going to get approved without more community engagement and comment? Is that something that McKenna would be able to do? In terms of timeline, we can figure that out, but.
Yeah, possibly. We can put, draft language into the document.
Okay.
Where we think it belongs.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can work together on that. And I like the idea. So if we have our meeting on, I think that's November 8th, the week before November 1st, we kind of go live. Commission, here you go. Community, here you go. Here is the initial draft. Talking about it on the 8th. That's kind of maybe the next step for the short-term rental issue.
Sure.
The current ordinance will stay in its current form, so it'll be listed in special land use, or not special land use, table of land uses.
Yeah.
And again, then the 24th will be, what's the rest of the chapters we haven't covered yet? Is there anything this evening we want to revisit? And then let's get these open houses lined up. It's kind of nice because it doesn't have to be a quorum thing. It can be an event mostly sponsored, by just city staff and McKenna. And we can talk about that because everybody says, oh, we're all going to show up. And it's like, oh, well, we got a quorum. So we'll have to, we'll have to just deal with that too. But that's kind of what I think.
Okay.
The next few weeks.
Because I feel like, whether we put something to paper as a draft, right? Love it or hate it, it's at least something to actually
Gives us something to start with and talk about.
right? I mean,
Yep.
we can sit here and talk about the pros and cons but without any idea of what makes its way into the zoning ordinance, right? I want to be, we should be mindful of everybody's right time and engagement. So at least we have something that's concrete that we can get feedback on and
Good.
give the feedback back to McKenna.
All right, any final thoughts, anybody?
Maybe that makes sense.
All right, so unless anybody has anything else to say on the commission in terms of new business, we'll move on to item 7 of our agenda, which is public comment on non-agenda items. It's just going to be public comment. We're not, as we discussed earlier, we're not going to limit everything to agenda versus non-agenda. And ma'am in the back, I saw you had a hand. I don't know if you still want to address us.
I just, there was a lot of talk in the whole Airbnb and reviews about zones and, different areas and whether you can, certainly, disrespect about somebody's lawn. All the zones are residential, whether they're multifamily or single family, they're residential. Rentals are allowed into all those zones. And a single family's lawn is, again, not it's not any more important than a multifamily. So I really, again, would like to stress that, that we do limit the number in certain areas, that it gets spread out. I mean, there's supply and demand. If if there's only so many in certain areas and then other ones become available, people will rise to them. And so I really would like to see that limit, that it's not one neighborhood carrying the burden of all the Airbnbs. I think they're absolutely necessary. I think that these owners are doing a great job. We just don't want one neighborhood carrying the burden of the entire Airbnb.
All right, thank you. Anybody else who wants to give public comment? Mary, I saw you. Okay, ma'am, come on up. Would you come up?
I'll sit in my seat, if you don't mind.
So I
prefer
so-
everyone sitting in their seats.
So Warren, this lady in the back was the first one that stayed in their seat to actually give
I'm
comment.
sorry.
No, that's okay, and I was okay with it, but Warren
can't-
reminded me that we need
We can't
microphones
hear.
and we need to be able to record everything, so if you would come up to the podium, ma'am.
I prefer to sit, if you don't mind. So I just want to make a comment, that there were many comments made at the board and many recommendations, identifying limiting the number of licenses, limiting the locations, preference to local, limiting the number of occupants, limiting the number of people, limiting the number of cars, limiting the number per block, talking about staffing capacities to manage the enforcement of any of these codes or zoning that we rewrite. My hope is that in the draft that you will put forward for discussion, it includes all of those recommendations for the council that your board has made to you. I've heard Warren say twice, oh, I don't really like that, or I'm not sure that's a good idea. I would recommend that you take what your board members are saying and actually include it, whether you may like it or not like it. Their position is to tell you what they would like to see in that ordinance and guidance. I hope that you, and working with McKenna, will take those into consideration so that all the opportunities that have been presented to you are presented to the community in your first draft, for which we can all make comments to, and then you can reiterate. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, anything that we see on a draft is a working document and it's subject to change and nothing is being rubber stamped or anything like that. So all of the concerns that we've heard from everybody making comment are going to be addressed. And so, Mary, I saw your hand up. Would you come up to the podium, please? Thank you.
A couple of follow-up questions, comments, and hopefully commitments. On the zoning ordinance first, I heard some discussion about a timeline, about how this all came to the fore. I think when you put it in front of the public, that is really important. There's a lot of chatter, as you know, on social media about who's drafting this thing, who's behind the idea of by right parking. You really should clear that up, okay? Whose idea was it? Whose idea was it? It may not be what happens in the end, and I sure as heck hope it isn't. But I think people need to own this document and where it came from, because otherwise, all that chatter is going to continue. Point number one. So I hope there's a commitment to that. I think I heard you say, Mr. Chairman, something about a timeline. I think that's important. Second thing is I heard Mr. Drever, something I had not heard until tonight talk about some memo that was referred to. I would highly recommend that it be released tomorrow on the website. You know, these materials are not there when I go to the planning commission portal. They should be. I mean, or the alternative is you're telling us we have to file a FOIA for that, and I just think that's really bad. So, I think that's it, because you answered some other questions that I had. It sounds like you're gonna put a draft, if I heard you right, it sounds like you're gonna put a draft out of the proposed Airbnb regulations, so people can look at it and decide how they're reacting. I really highly recommend that. You've got to give us something to shoot at, so to speak. And finally, I would ask you to consider, as I said in my comments, a citizens committee to look at the zoning ordinance. It's not too late. It's in your own bylaws. That would be my recommendation. I think short of that, you're gonna have a lot of people, especially in the patch where I live, saying, we're not being represented here.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Anybody else who wants to make public comment at this time? Anybody? Going once, going twice, seeing no hands. All right, so that moves us to item number 8, which is the adjournment of tonight's meeting. So at this point, I would ask if anybody on the commission has a motion to adjourn our meeting this evening. Commission, Mr. Heckey, is there a second?
Second.
We'll give this one to Commissioner Taylor. She hasn't done it yet tonight. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. We're all done. Thanks, everybody.
Wow.